You've seen all kinds of videos on the best places to live in Texas, but you may still have one question. Is moving to Texas right for your family? So we're gonna talk about this today, but I have to forewarn you, I'm going to go spiritual on you. Many of you who have watched my channels for years may have found out, discovered, or heard me mention that my husband and I, we pastor a church as well as helping people move to Texas. So while finding the right city, neighborhood, and home is very important, of course, you still may be struggling with some deeper questions, like what if you are leaving family behind in another state? Or what if is it God's will for my family to move to Texas? Or is moving to Texas really going to make a difference in my children's lives? Is the culture really different? All of those things and more. And so in this next season of videos, this is what we're going to talk about. And just to let you know, my goal is not to convince you to move to Texas. It's really to share my story, maybe stories of other families, and give you some thought-provoking questions and perspective for you to consider. Many times we get on these Zoom consultation calls, and after talking with my husband and I, people are like, maybe it's not right for my family, or maybe it's not right now. Maybe it's right later in a different season of life. So our goal is just to help you make those decisions, maybe give you thought-provoking questions so that you can make that decision for yourself. And if it's wonderful and right for you, then hey, we'd be so happy to help. But if not, that's okay too. So first up, I'm gonna share my story of how my family ended up in Texas and why, and how that's impacted my kids. And then also after that, I'm gonna share some questions for you to consider to think about if it's right for your family. Sometimes it's not right, but we wanna discuss those things. So first off, I moved to Texas when I was only 4 years old. And the reason my parents moved to Texas from Minnesota was because they wanted to escape an abusive family environment. I mean, extended family members were literally abusing our family. My parents both grew up in just terrible home life experiences, and they wanted to separate themselves from that. I mean, we're talking extreme abuse, okay? So my parents, they woke up one day and said, this is it. We've had enough, and we want to make a change because we don't want to raise our kids in the same environment that we were raised in. They said, well, let's move. Well, where are we gonna move? Now, keep in mind, my parents are not political. They were not Christian. They just said, hey, we gotta get out of this environment. Where do we wanna move? They pulled out a map and said, we gotta move someplace warmer. They were in Minnesota and it's cold. It gets cold up there. So they said, I don't know, let's move to Texas. So they literally sold everything that they had. They're musicians, they're still musicians to this day, and they kept their music equipment. They didn't own a home back then, they were renting, and we had a few clothes. We got to pick out 2 toys each of, I have 2 older siblings, a brother and sister. We all got to choose a couple of toys. They put us in the back of a pickup truck with a camper on top, you know, those old school trucks, and they just drove to Texas. Now, I do not advise you to just have no plan and move to Texas. Woo, that's stressful. But they did it. Back then, they didn't have the internet, so it was a big faith move. I thought it was an adventure at the time because I thought, woohoo, I remember at 4 driving and seeing the city lights, and I was excited about it. I had no clue that they had no place to live, no jobs, all of those things. But anyway, all that being said, long story short, they only had $2,500 to their name. They ended up in a hotel, found someone to rent a house to them. They got jobs. And voila, here we are many, many years later. Now, what that has done for my family, I wanna share with you because the environment definitely made an impact on my family. We say that move that my parents made was the best decision that they made in their lives. Other than staying married and loving each other, which is awesome in and of itself, we say that was the best life decision they made because it impacted our family. My brother, my sister, myself, all of our families all live here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We love Texas. They did move, my brother and sister moved away for a while and then they came back. So we love living in Texas. and what that's done for my family. Let's talk about that. What it's done for my family is I grew up in a very conservative environment. Again, I didn't grow up political, I didn't grow up Christian, and so that environment definitely impacted the way I think. So now that I'm an adult, I am now Christian, and I have assessed all of the political views. I go, oh wow, I do lean conservative. There are some topics that I'm kind of in the middle. Maybe I lean a little liberal, but for the most part, I am conservative. So all that being said, that environment helped foster the conservative in me. So if you are looking for a conservative environment, the suburbs of Texas and the country life definitely foster a conservative lifestyle. The big cities like Dallas, Austin, Houston, they do, I would say, foster liberal thinking. But besides that, I did meet my husband, who was a churchgoer. I met him at 14. He started taking me to church. I gave my life to Jesus. Then I raised my kids in this environment. As I raised my kids, we had them in church. We chose a lifestyle that created an environment for my kids. And so what I would say is for my family, especially after talking to many other families in other states, I realized, I didn't know this at the time, I realized that being in Texas had a multitude of options. Options for churches, options for Christian schooling, options for finding friends that had the same values as our family. And so I would find moms that had the same values. My kids then could make friends with those families who had the same values. And so now that my kids are college age, our oldest is actually graduating this year from college, it's such an amazing feeling to know that my kids still love the Lord. I don't worry about my kids, because and there were multiple things that helped create children that love the Lord. I tell my daughter, she's at Dallas Baptist University is where she's going to college. I'm like, go out with your friends, go have fun. She's like, Mom, I'd rather just go to bed at 10 p.m. so that I can be fresh for the day. And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. I don't worry about my kids getting into trouble. I would attribute that to several things. 1, being in Texas, 2, being in church, and 3, creating that environment for them of like-minded friends so that even in young adulthood, I don't worry about them running from the faith. They really love the Lord. One day, maybe you'll get to meet them. All 3 love the Lord. And so that for me was my goal, is that the kids would grow up loving the Lord regardless of where we're at, right? I feel like in Texas, it was much easier to foster that because the environment was readily available. It wasn't challenging to find other Christian families. It wasn't challenging to find a great church. All of those things were very, very good for our family. For schooling, we did put them in public and private for 1 year each, and we homeschooled the rest of the time. So all of those things did help foster that environment, as well as staying married and working on our marriage on a regular basis. So if that's your goal, do consider that. But I do have some more prompting questions for you, not just my story. But when do I see families where it's not right for their family? Sometimes I see there's a spouse who wants to move to Texas because they desire this deep change within them. They're not happy with their lives, and they think moving to Texas is going to fix the problem, when really it's not an environmental problem, it's an inward problem. And so I'll see families just get drugged through the mud, because guys, moving to Texas is no small thing, right? This is a big deal if you move to Texas, and I want it to be right for your family, but it breaks my heart when I see someone making an outward change when it really needs to be an inward change. Sometimes I see people who think changing their circumstances are going to change their life, and then they're not happy with Texas because their problems just keep following them. Because their problems are not an environmental problem, their problems are an inward problem. And that's not what I want for you, because that sure is a lot of hassle for your problems just to follow you. So this is where you have to assess, is moving to Texas really right for you? Are you seeking an environment change? Are you seeking a change in general? Are you moving to Texas because you need a cultural change, maybe an environment change? Maybe you're like my family, getting away from crazy family. Maybe it's a political change. Many people are moving to Texas because they are just at the end of their rope. They don't feel there's any hope for them in the situation that they're in politically, and their values are just not aligned. So that's valid. Moving to Texas for values, to to be aligned in your culture and environment is completely valid. And many people, I would say 80% of the people that we help, that's the reason we're helping them move to Texas. Sometimes people are getting job changes, and that's valid, but if you're looking for an outward solution to an inward problem, that can be a problem. The second thing that you want to consider when moving to Texas is, what's the fruit going to produce? What fruit are you looking for your family? And moving to Texas, what's the fruit going to look like? So biblically speaking, I want to make decisions based on love, because love is the one command God gave us under the new covenant in the New Testament. And so we always want to put our decisions up against the fruit. What fruit will this produce in your spouse? What fruit will this produce in your children? Again, for my children to grow up in this environment, the fruit was very, very sweet. Moving to Texas is not going to guarantee that you have amazing kids. There's multiple things can contribute to that, but it can be a part of fostering the environment for kids. So what's the fruit going to produce? And maybe there's negative fruit. Maybe there's dissension that happens in your marriage. Well, if you're not both on the same page, then I don't recommend moving to Texas until both husband and wife are on the same page. Now, if kids are throwing fits because they're going to lose their friends or this or that, well, it's not the kids' decision. You know what's best for the kids. I'm not saying don't take their thoughts into consideration. I'm just saying you and your spouse get together, be on the same page when moving to Texas. I have seen this too, where one spouse is like putting the pedal to the metal, moving to Texas. The other spouse is like, no. And listen, rarely do I see that work out. So make sure your spouse is on the same page. Maybe it takes a time for them to warm up. That's okay. But just make sure you guys are on the same page when moving to Texas. Next up, conservative beliefs. Texas does lean conservative. Doesn't mean we are all conservatives here, but again, the suburbs and country life are definitely conservative thinking. So make sure your beliefs are lined up with that. Not saying you can't move here if you're liberal, but it may be a little uncomfortable. Some people just want to change, and there's nothing wrong with wanting a change. If you just want a change of environment, a change place to live, as long as you and your spouse are on the same page, there's nothing wrong with just wanting a change and moving to Texas. Just make sure you and your spouse are on the same page. So here's a couple of questions to contemplate if moving to Texas is right for your family. One is just think, what's the end look like for your family? Where do you want to be? Whether it's when your kids are grown, maybe it's at retirement. What do you want in the end for your family? And where you live now, going to foster that environment? Do you need to make that change for that environment? Again, maybe it's a job change. Maybe it's a financial decision. Maybe it's a lower cost of living. I mean, there's many, many ways to answer this, but think about the end for your family. What environment do you want for your family? Is safety a concern? Is conservative environment a concern? So just think about the questions to contemplate if moving to Texas is right for your family. What's the fruit going to produce? Is this the environment that it's going to foster a life safety, maybe conservative values, Christian, I don't know, whatever it is, your values, is Texas going to facilitate that environment for you? Convenience. There's all kinds of factors that you can question to discover if Texas is right for you. All right, so if you have questions, contemplative questions, if that contemplative, is that a word? If you have questions about moving to Texas, whether it's the best places to live, listen, I've been all over the state of Texas, whether it's, is it right for your family? Maybe it's spiritual questions, put them in the comments below. Or also, if it's right for your family, you're teetering that you think it's probably right, book a Zoom consultation in the link below, and we'd be happy to help assist you move to Texas. Watch in the following videos. Let's answer this question, is it God's will to move to Texas? That's coming up next.